Man, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the freaking channel. Right now we're going to be taking a look at the Huawei Nexus 6P. I've never said Huawei before in my life. Just kidding. We're going to be taking a look at the Google Nexus 6P, whatever you guys want to call it. This was actually the last iteration. This and the Nexus 5X were the last iterations of the Nexus line, and I freaking loved this line of phones, mostly because it kind of reminded me of like iOS and iPhones in a way. And I'm not saying like Google copied iPhones or anything like that. I love both of them. I have mad respect for both, but the main reason I love the Nexus line was because they prolonged the life and they kind of just updated these phones regularly, and I freaking love that. I love software so much, and getting the latest features and everything like that just excited me. I owned the Nexus 4 as a main phone for like 2 years, man. I owned that thing for a long time. It had like a cracked back and like a broken camera and all that stuff, but I love that thing because there was so much not only like software development for that from Google themselves, but also a lot of like Android development and like third party. So I flashed a lot of custom ROMs on it. I love that thing to death, and this was the bigger brother in a way than Nexus 6P. So let's just take a look at it. I'm super excited to look at it finally. I've been doing this type of video for this specific phone for the last 2 years, and you guys love this phone so much. So I don't think you guys are going to like this review because I'm going to be kind of harsh on it, but you know what? It is what it is. Now, the Nexus 6P came out in 2015 in September, so this year it'll actually turn 4 years. So it's kind of old, not really. I mean, they say never to ask a girl their age. I say never to ask a phone their age because looks can be deceiving. You know, I was going to go further, but you guys are going to go mad at me. And this is one of those phones that if we weren't going on the bezel-less trend, that I would literally look at this phone and be like, man, that is a good looking phone. Because for me personally, I like the gold model a little bit more, but the front of this phone, I always liked it because of the thick bezels. And now we're in like a theme of going to smaller bezels, but it just gave you something to hold. You know, there's nothing wrong with a little thickness in your life, you know what I mean? And the screen was massive. It has 5.7 inches. It's AMOLED. I don't know why it didn't say Super AMOLED, but it was an AMOLED screen. I freaking love this thing. I think the panel itself was pretty decent. It was 1440p. Weirdly enough, there was no IP certification or anything, but we did have front-facing speakers, so that's a pretty decent trade-off. We had an aluminum build kind of fingerprint sensor on the back. I think the back camera was super awkward. I kind of liked it a little bit, but I feel like the camera just didn't fit properly in it. Kind of a small opinion. Nobody's ever really said that before, but someone had to say, you know, it's been years, somebody had to bring it up. And you have a USB Type-C port on the bottom and a headphone jack. And if you were to just to look at this phone, I would still think this is a very premium phone. This thing kind of reminds me of like the Galaxy S6 in a way. I think this and the Galaxy S6 came out in the same year. I could be completely wrong, but all those phones, I think 2015 was a pretty decent year of phones because these phones felt super premium, and they still do. And there's not a lot of phones that are still being released that you could look back and be like, man, in like 10 years, this phone's going to be crazy premium. Kind of a dumb thing to say, but that's kind of what I think. So in terms of the overall feel of this body, I think it's super solid, but it's also one of the biggest flaws of this body because this phone was super easy to bend. If you guys don't remember the whole iPhone 6 Plus bending thing, a lot of people were able to bend the Nexus 6P super easily, and that might have been a reason why there were a lot of complaints about touch disease and things, but I'll kind of get into that in a second. But that in and of itself is a pretty big, you know, yikes for me because most likely you're going to be getting this phone used. It's going to have gone through a lot of like beatings, a lot of droppings, things and that. So chances are if you're getting this thing used, there's going to be quite a bit of problems on it potentially. I'm not saying all of them, but some of them could have problems. So you kind of have to keep that in mind when you're kind of buying this phone and looking forward to it and looking at it in like the future of it. Now, in terms of software, this is pretty interesting. So it started with Android Marshmallow, and you are able to upgrade it to Android Oreo, which is Android 8.0. So it got updates for about 2-3 years, which is pretty respectable, no doubt. But you also have to remember that this phone was a Nexus. So a lot of people were able to buy this phone, and they kind of bought it because of the software. And once it's unsupported, a lot of people went out of their way to develop ROMs, custom ROMs for this phone. This phone is completely able to be rooted. You're able to custom ROM it. I've seen all sorts of Android Nougat ROMs, Android Oreo ROMs, and so many Android Pie ROMs as well. I would probably stick with an Android Oreo ROM, an Android 8.1 ROM if you can find it. But there's also Android Pie ROMs, and I would really recommend you to test those out too. So if you're planning on getting this phone, I would highly recommend you to go custom ROM this thing, see what the possibilities are. I think there's custom kernels for this thing too, so the possibilities are endless. I think there's always going to be some type of support behind this phone. I've been on the Nexus 6P subreddit as well, and a lot of people, you know, there's like a love-hate relationship with it there. They bash it, they love it, they bash it, they love it, and I think it has a lot to do with a different category that I'll bring up in like a minute and like later in this video. But as of right now, I think the software was one of the best features of this phone, and the fact that it got supported for quite a bit of time, and now there's a lot of third-party development outside of it, I think that's a super cool thing about this phone. phone. Now moving to the performance, let's just go over the specs and I'll tell you how it feels. It has a Qualcomm Snapdragon 810 chipset, an octa-core CPU, an Adreno 430 GPU, and 3 gigs of RAM. And a lot of people have mixed feelings about the performance of this phone, and in my opinion, I've stated before that this phone is pretty decent in performance, and I think that my opinion has changed a little bit. I don't think this thing is like the best performing phone ever. I don't even think in 2015 it was the best performing phone. And even though this phone has the capability of being on like super like new software with like Android Pie and like custom ROMs, I just don't see this phone being that good of a performer anymore. And I don't know what it has to do with. I mean, the screen is 1440p, but we have 1440p screens now that are like, we have higher resolution screens than that, and that thing is able to push pixels like crazy. So I don't know what specifically the problem was, and this thing was on stock Android, but it just seems like it was like a little glitchy here and there. It just seems like it wasn't like that smooth of an experience, and that's a lot coming from a device that is on stock Android. It could be because the PPI was kind of high at 518 pixels per inch, but it just seems like when you're like even going through the front page or you're opening apps or whatever the case is, it just seems like it's a lot of like mushiness in a way. Like it's not as smooth as you would expect it to be, especially on a device with 3 gigs of RAM on Android Oreo or whatever it is. And maybe if you flash the custom kernel, it might be better, but that's kind of surprising to me. I think gaming, I mean like casual games are fine, Pew Pew, Temple Run, Stack, whatever you're going to do with it. But Road Racing 3 was kind of choppy as well, which was surprising. I wasn't expecting it to be choppy, but it was a little bit. So I would assume with higher intensive games, it's not perfectly, it doesn't run perfectly. I guess you can get some decent frame rates out of it if you're kind of careful with it, if you lower the graphical settings of a game, but that was kind of surprising to me. I wasn't expecting it to have this type of performance on it, and I guess that was kind of my fault because I maybe expected too much from it, but I thought the Nexus 6P was capable of, handling it. Maybe that's Android Oreo, maybe it's not. Usually when I tested this phone, it was on Android Nougat, so maybe that was something to do with it, but that's just kind of my opinion on it. Now switching to the camera, this was at the time one of the better aspects of this phone. So it had a 12.3 megapixel sensor on the back. It's a single sensor. And I remember at the time people were like, man, this is such a great camera. It really like revolutionized what the Nexus line had, because at the time before, it was kind of known to having like not the best camera. I had the Nexus 4. Not that great. I've owned every Nexus line of phone, and I think the Nexus 6P's camera isn't that bad. I think it's definitely still decent. You're able to shoot 4K videos on it, so that's really, really cool. There's no optical image stabilization that I know of, but you do have laser autofocus, and I think that the camera is a decent add-on to the phone, so it's not like a con to it, no doubt. But I do think it could have been potentially better in my opinion. Now it's kind of a lot asking from a phone from 2015, but I kind of look at the iPhone 6s Plus and even the iPhone 6s, and those cameras on this phones I think are better than what this one is. So, and again, I don't want to compare it too much to like other phones that and this and that, but I kind of already did. I think the Nexus 6P's camera isn't a horrible thing, and I could see it potentially being a plus for this phone. And the front camera is 8 megapixels. You can shoot 1080p videos on it. It's not bad either. I never really liked front cameras on Android phones until like about 2017 era phones, but I'll tell you this, the camera on this thing, both front and back, are definitely a mild plus. It's not a con on this phone at all. And moving on to the battery life, it had a 3,450 milliamp hour battery. Now that is a pretty big sized battery if I'm being honest, okay? We have a lot of phones now that don't even hit the 3,000 milliamp hour battery mark, which is so stupid. We should have phones that are above that. And if it worked 100% all the time, that would be an amazing thing. And that's a really big battery. But here's the thing. A lot of people complained about the battery on the Nexus 6P. They said that it was faulty. They said it would like crash at like 50%. And once you charge it up, it will just die automatically. This and that. A lot of complaints happened from the battery. So there was like touch disease problems and there were battery problems as well. And for my specific Nexus 6P, I never experienced that. For both of the Nexus 6P I own, I never experienced any of those problems, but I know of a lot of people who did. I don't know them personally, but I see them on Reddit, I see them talk, whatever. And I've heard a lot about this phone throughout the years that it's been out of the battery problems. And Huawei did their own thing about their battery replacements, and I guess they were pretty decent at it. But what I would tell you is this, they should have done a better job at the battery life and the batteries. I think the battery size was good, but they should have knocked that out of the park. This phone could have been easily one of the best phones. If that part worked on it, I would 100% still recommend this phone to people as I did before. Before I knew how fast that problem was, I would just recommend this phone left and right to people. It was like the Google Pixel, how I'm recommending the Google Pixel to people now. I would recommend the Nexus 6P, even the Nexus 5X, but both of those Nexus phones had problems, and it was like the phone that could have been timeless. If those problems didn't exist, I would probably recommend this all the time, because I think it's super cheap now. I think you can get one for like less than $100. It's a 5.7-inch AMOLED screen. The build quality is awesome, but the problems with this phone, the touch disease, like I said, the battery shutdown problem, even the build quality is kind of a con because it was so easily bent. There's just so many problems with this phone, and I hate to like go down this rabbit hole of like hyping it up then like kind of crashing it down, but I don't want to be irresponsible with like the position that I'm in to recommend people a phone that could potentially go faulty. And you might get a lemon, you might get a phone that'll work 100% and you'll never have a problem with it. But for me to recommend a phone that could potentially go wrong, and I think any phone in the market could potentially go wrong, but a phone that is known for that is kind of irresponsible on my part, and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. Even if it makes me more money to like recommend a phone, have people buy that, I would probably be better off recommending another phone that people might not like, but more of a safer option. So what I'll tell you is the Nexus 6P still worth it in 2019? If you have it currently, then keep it. I think it's a pretty decent phone if you're able to stick it out that long. Maybe your phone doesn't have any problems, but I don't think I want to recommend people to buy the Nexus 6P, not because it's a horrible phone, not because of whatever, but because of the problems that are associated with the Nexus 6P. And I kind of want this to be a learning lesson to a lot of manufacturers to not make phones that have potential problems. They should be much better at their supply chain and all these other levels of their testing process to make sure that their phone works and doesn't have any problems with it. But I'm not going to leave you hanging. I would probably 100% recommend the Google Pixel over the Nexus 6P, okay? You could probably find one for like about $60 more, $50 more. I've seen a lot of them on Amazon for really cheap, so I'll link some in the description below. Another phone I would probably recommend over this maybe would be like a OnePlus 3T or a OnePlus 5 or even like a OnePlus 3. Those phones are still pretty solid. Those are the main ones that come to my head, so I'll link a OnePlus 3T or OnePlus 5, whatever I can find on Amazon for the cheapest price. I'll link those down below and the Google Pixel. So again, buy those through those links. If you want to help support the channel, I find the cheapest prices, put them down there, and they support the channel at the same time. Like I said, it helps us do more giveaways and videos and things like that. So that's pretty much my opinion. This video was a long-winded and long-awaited, but I had to drop it. Sorry if I offended anybody, but I love all you guys, so I just had to say that. But that is pretty much it. If you guys have any questions or anything like that, leave it down in the comment section below. Hit that like button, that'll mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it'll mean so much if you guys could hit that. Also, check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel, all those links are linked down below. I'd really appreciate if you guys could check it out. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.